propaganda campaign. During World War II, when many Americans were being sent off to the battlefront, Americans at home were encouraged to contribute to the war efforts through voluntary sacrifices. The U.S. government used propaganda as a way to persuade Americans to contribute to the war and promote patriotism. Propaganda is when information is used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Propaganda was used to persuade Americans of the importance of the war, evoke patriotism, and rally support at home with conservative efforts and in the workforce. Propaganda came in different forms: posters, songs, movies, and even cartoons. Posters were an inexpensive, accessible way to incite patriotism. They were displayed in schools and store windows. These posters encouraged Americans to support the war efforts in various ways. Everyone contributed in the war efforts. Children and teens collected various items that could be recycled into other products for the war. Tires and gas masks were made from recycled rubber bands and old tires. Nylons, a woman's fashion accessory, were recycled into parachutes. Tanks, ships, planes, and weapons were made from candy wrappers and scrap metals. American citizens grew fruit and vegetables in victory gardens, also called war gardens. The gardens reduced demand on the public food supply. This was also a way for individuals to feel like they were contributing to the war efforts. During the war, Americans were asked to conserve everything, including food. The government needed to regulate food consumption. Americans were issued ration books that were used to purchase necessities such as sugar, canned goods, meat, butter, coffee, and gasoline. Conservative efforts were necessary for making the food supply last the month. With men headed to the battlefront, World War II brought new opportunities for women. Women filled many traditionally male jobs. Women joined the Nurse Corps and armed forces in the military. They worked in U.S. factories that were converted for wartime production. Once considered men's work, jobs in ammunition plants and building ships, aircrafts, and weaponry became the work of women. They worked on farms, plowing and harvesting. This work was essential for maintaining the food supply. Initially called defense bonds, war bonds were debt securities used to fund the military during the war. This was a way for the government to borrow money to finance the war efforts. The government promised to repay the purchaser interest on the bond over time. Americans were urged to purchase bonds as a way of demonstrating their patriotism and support for the war. Another form of propaganda used in the United States was radio. President Roosevelt's fireside chats were an effective way of speaking to millions of Americans, reassuring them about the progress of the war. He encouraged listeners to support the war efforts, to work hard building planes, weapons, and ships that would be used to win the war.
We are calling for new plants and additions to old plants. We are calling for plant conversion to war needs. We are seeking more men and more women to run them.
Hollywood movies incited patriotism and racism against the enemy. Many movies were created with war themes, including films such as Yankee Doodle Dandy in 1942 with James Cagney and Anchors Aweigh in 1945 with Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra portraying sailors. Cartoons created by Warner Brothers and Disney were another form of propaganda used to influence the opinions of Americans. Comic books were also another form of propaganda media. During World War II, propaganda was a powerful tool for invoking patriotism in Americans. From recycling to supplying the materials needed for war, to buying war bonds to pay for the war, the whole country was needed to win World War II. To get everyone involved, the government's propaganda campaign was needed.